I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, revolutionary leader, military commander, and I have been living a lie. Not the kind of political lie that everyone expects from leaders, the diplomatic half-truths or strategic omissions that come with governing. No, this was a deeper lie, a personal sin that I had been hiding for 3 years, a secret that was slowly destroying me from the inside, even as I presented a strong, confident face to my nation and the world. It started 6 months after I became president, during the most intense period of our fight against neo-colonial forces. I had just expelled French troops from Burkina Faso, had begun challenging the economic structures that kept our nation subordinate to Western interests, and was facing enormous pressure from international powers who wanted to see our revolution fail. The stress was overwhelming, the responsibility crushing, and I felt alone in ways I had never experienced before. That's when I met her. I won't use her name, she doesn't deserve to be publicly identified with my failure. She worked in the communications department of the presidential administration, a brilliant young woman with a sharp mind and a fierce commitment to our revolutionary ideals. We began working together on messaging strategies, spending long hours crafting communications that would rally our people and resist international propaganda against our government. At first, it was purely professional. But somewhere in those late-night strategy sessions, something shifted. I was married, I had a wife who had stood by me through my years as a soldier and through the dangerous early days of our revolution. But my marriage had become strained under the weight of my responsibilities as president. My wife and I barely saw each other. When we did speak, it was usually about logistics, security concerns, or official matters. The intimacy had drained out of our relationship, replaced by distance and exhaustion. This young woman in my communications department saw me differently. She saw the revolutionary leader, the visionary, the man fighting against empire and injustice. She didn't see the tired husband, the absent father, the man failing to maintain his most important personal relationships. When I was with her, I felt alive in ways I hadn't felt in months. I felt appreciated, understood, admired. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was betraying my wife, betraying my own values, betraying the integrity I claimed to bring to leadership. But I rationalized it. I told myself I deserved some comfort given the enormous burdens I was carrying. I told myself my marriage was already broken anyway. I told myself that compared to the massive injustices I was fighting, colonialism, exploitation, poverty, this personal failing was relatively minor. The affair lasted 4 months. We were discreet, careful, aware that discovery would create a massive scandal that could undermine everything we were trying to accomplish politically. But the guilt ate at me constantly. Every time I spoke publicly about integrity, about revolutionary morality, about the need for leaders to be different from the corrupt politicians we had overthrown, I felt like a fraud. Every time I saw my wife, I felt the weight of my betrayal. Every time I prayed, I had recently become a Christian after years of religious indifference. I felt the hypocrisy of asking God for guidance while deliberately continuing in sin. Eventually, I ended the affair, not because I suddenly became noble or righteous, but because I couldn't continue bearing the weight of the deception. I told the young woman that we couldn't continue, that it was wrong, that I needed to work on my marriage. She was hurt and angry, but she agreed. She eventually requested a transfer to a different department, and we stopped seeing each other. But ending the affair didn't end my torment. If anything, it got worse. The guilt that I had been somewhat able to rationalize while the affair was ongoing became unbearable once it ended. I had betrayed my wife, compromised my integrity, violated my own moral standards, and now I carried that knowledge alone. My wife didn't know. My closest advisors didn't know. No one knew except me and the woman I had been involved with. I tried to move forward, to bury the guilt and focus on my work as president. For 3 years, I carried this secret, this sin that I had never confessed to anyone. I threw myself into my responsibilities with even greater intensity, perhaps hoping that if I served my country well enough, if I fought corruption aggressively enough, if I challenged neocolonialism boldly enough, it would somehow balance out my personal failure. But it didn't work that way. The guilt remained, growing heavier over time rather than lighter. I would wake up at night, the memory of my betrayal crashing over me. I would be in important meetings, making crucial decisions, and suddenly be struck by the thought, who are you to lead? You're a fraud. You're no better than the corrupt leaders you claim to oppose. My relationship with my wife remained distant. The affair had ended, but the barrier it had created between us remained. I wanted to restore intimacy with her, wanted to be honest, wanted to rebuild what had been broken, but I was terrified of confessing. What if she left me? What if she exposed the affair publicly? What if my political enemies use the scandal to undermine our revolutionary government? So I said nothing. I carried the secret, and it slowly poisoned everything in my life. 6 months ago, I had begun attending church regularly after a powerful experience of answered prayer during a security crisis. I was learning about Christianity, about grace and forgiveness, about Jesus dying for sins. My pastor friend Samuel would preach about confession, about bringing our sins into the light, about the freedom that comes from honesty before God and before others. Every time he preached on these topics, I felt like he was speaking directly to me, exposing the secret I had worked so hard to hide. But I still said nothing. I prayed privately, asking God to forgive me for the affair, promising I would never do anything like that again. But I never confessed to my wife. I never told my pastor or any spiritual mentor. I never brought the sin fully into the light. I kept it in the shadows, acknowledged only in my private prayers. The turning point came 3 weeks ago during a Sunday church service. The sermon was about David, the king of Israel, who had committed adultery with Bathsheba and then tried to cover it up by having her husband killed. I knew the story vaguely from my limited knowledge of the Bible, but hearing it preached in detail was devastating. The pastor described how David tried to hide his sin, how the cover-up only made things worse, how the guilt and deception corroded his soul. Then he described the moment when the prophet Nathan confronted David, and David finally confessed, "I have sinned against the Lord." The pastor explained that it was only after full confession, not just private acknowledgement to God, but open admission of his sin, that David found forgiveness and restoration. "Some of you are living with secret sins," the pastor said, looking out over the congregation. It felt like he was looking directly at me, though I knew rationally that he couldn't know my secret. "You think you're managing them by keeping them hidden. You confess privately to God and think that's enough. But hidden sin is like a cancer. It grows in the darkness, poisoning everything it touches. Confession means bringing sin into the light, speaking it aloud, making it known to God and to others. That's when healing begins. That's when freedom comes." I sat in that church pew feeling like I had been physically struck. I absolutely knew that God was speaking to me through that sermon, that I was being called to confess my sin fully, not just to God in private prayers, but to my wife, to my spiritual mentors, to whoever needed to know, so that I could be fully honest, fully accountable, fully free. But the fear was overwhelming. Confessing would mean facing my wife's pain and anger. It would mean risking my marriage. It would potentially mean creating a scandal that could damage my presidency and our revolutionary government. It would mean admitting to everyone that I was not the man of integrity I pretended to be. I left church that day knowing what I needed to do, but not yet having the courage to do it. For 2 weeks, I wrestled with it constantly. I would wake up determined to confess that day, then find excuses to delay. "Not today, there's an important security meeting." "Not today, my wife seems stressed about something else." "Not today, the political situation is too volatile." But the conviction wouldn't go away. The more I delayed, the heavier the burden became. I found myself increasingly unable to focus on my work as president. During important meetings, my mind would drift to my unconfessed sin. When making crucial decisions, I would be paralyzed by self-doubt, questioning whether I had any moral authority to lead. My prayer life became tortured. I would try to pray about national issues, about security challenges, about wisdom for governance, but my prayers felt blocked, like they were bouncing off the ceiling rather than reaching heaven. The intimacy with God I had begun to experience after my first prayers was fading, replaced by a sense of distance and barrier. Finally, 1 week ago, I reached a breaking point. I was in my private office late at night trying to pray, and I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I felt nothing but guilt and hypocrisy. And in that moment I heard, not audibly but clearly in my spirit, a voice asking me, "Ibrahim, how long will you hide? How long will you carry this burden alone? Confess your sin and be free." I broke down completely, sobbing at my desk like I hadn't cried since I was a child. All the defenses I had built around my secret collapsed. I couldn't carry it anymore. I couldn't maintain the pretense anymore. I had to confess, whatever the cost, whatever the consequences. I immediately called Samuel, my pastor friend, despite it being nearly midnight. "Samuel, I need to meet with you tomorrow. It's urgent. I need to confess something." He agreed without asking questions, and we met the next morning in a secure location. When we sat down, I looked at this man who had become my spiritual mentor and friend, and I felt terror at what I was about to reveal. But I also felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that I was finally going to unburden myself. "Samuel, 3 years ago, I committed adultery. I said, forcing the words out before I could lose courage. I had an affair with a woman in my administration. It lasted 4 months. I ended it 3 years ago, but I've never told anyone except her. My wife doesn't know. I've been carrying this secret, and it's destroying me. I watched his face as I spoke, fearing that I would see judgment, disgust, perhaps even rejection. Instead, I saw sadness and compassion. He was silent for a long moment after I finished, and I braced myself for the condemnation I felt I deserved. "Ibrahim," he finally said, his voice gentle but firm, "thank you for trusting me with this. I know how difficult it was to confess. But you need to understand something. Confessing to me is good and necessary for accountability and spiritual counsel. But it's not complete confession. You need to confess to your wife. She's the one you betrayed. She's the one who deserves to know the truth." The words landed like a hammer blow. I had hoped, irrationally, that confessing to my pastor would be enough, that I could receive God's forgiveness and move forward without the devastation of telling my wife, but I knew he was right. There could be no real honesty, no real freedom, without confessing to the person I had most deeply wronged. "She'll leave me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Our marriage is already strained. This will destroy it completely." Samuel leaned forward. "Maybe. That's a real possibility, and you need to accept it as a potential consequence of your sin. But Ibrahim, your marriage is already being destroyed by the secret you're keeping. Distance and deception are killing your relationship just as surely as open betrayal would. At least if you confess, you give your marriage a chance at real healing. Hidden sin offers no possibility of healing, only slow death. What if it becomes public? What if it creates a scandal that undermines our government?" I asked, grasping for any reason to delay. "Then you deal with those consequences too," he said firmly. "Ibrahim, you can't control all the outcomes of confession. What you can control is whether you continue living in deception or choose to walk in truth. God calls us to confession not because it's safe or convenient, but because it's necessary for spiritual health, for integrity, for freedom. You've been carrying this burden for 3 years. How much longer do you want to carry it?" His question broke through my remaining resistance. I didn't want to carry it anymore. I couldn't carry it anymore. Whatever happened, whatever I lost, I needed to be free from this secret. "Help me," I said to Samuel. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to tell her." We spent the next 2 hours preparing. Samuel helped me think through how to confess, not making excuses or minimizing what I had done, but taking full responsibility, acknowledging the pain I had caused, accepting whatever consequences followed. He warned me that my wife would likely go through intense emotions, anger, hurt, betrayal, possibly disbelief. He counseled me to let her feel whatever she needed to feel, to not try to manage or control her response. "Your job is to tell the truth completely and honestly," he said. "Her job is to decide how to respond. You don't get to control that. You gave up the right to control outcomes when you chose to betray her." The truth of his words was painful but necessary. I had been trying to control everything, control the secret, control who knew, control the consequences. But true confession meant surrendering control, accepting whatever came from honesty. That evening, I asked my wife to meet me in my private office at the presidential residence. She came, looking puzzled and slightly worried by the formal way I had requested the meeting. We sat facing each other, and for a moment I couldn't speak. This woman had been my partner through so many struggles. She had stood by me when I was just a junior military officer. She had supported my involvement in revolutionary politics despite the risks. She had endured the sacrifices and dangers that came with my presidency. And I had betrayed her. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice shaking despite my efforts to remain composed. "Something I should have told you 3 years ago, but I've been too cowardly to confess." She looked at me with growing concern, and I saw her body tense as she prepared for whatever blow was coming. 3 years ago, I had an affair," I said, forcing myself to speak clearly despite wanting to hide or soften the truth. "With a woman who worked in my administration. It lasted 4 months. I ended it 3 years ago, but I never told you. I've been carrying this secret, and I can't carry it anymore. I need to confess to you. I need to tell you the truth, whatever it costs." The color drained from her face. For several seconds, she just stared at me, as if her brain was refusing to process what I had just said. Then emotions flooded across her features in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, pain, rage. "You what?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then louder. "You what?" "I had an affair. I betrayed you. I'm so sorry." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Don't. Don't say you're sorry, not yet. I need to understand. Who was she? I told her not the woman's name, but who she was, how we had met, how the affair had developed. My wife listened with a face like stone, but I could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. How long, she asked. 4 months, 3 years ago. 3 years, she repeated, her voice hollow. You've been lying to me for 3 years. Every day for 3 years, you've looked at me, spoken to me, pretended everything was normal, while hiding this from me. Yes, I admitted, because there was no point in denying or softening it. I've been lying by omission for 3 years. I ended the affair, but I never confessed it. I told myself I was protecting you, protecting our family, protecting my work as president. But I was really just protecting myself. She laughed bitterly. Protecting me? You think keeping me in the dark about your betrayal was protecting me? You took away my right to know the truth about my own marriage. You're right, I said. You're absolutely right. There's no good justification for what I did, the affair, or the years of deception. I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm just trying to finally tell you the truth. Why now? She demanded. Why are you telling me now, after 3 years? Did someone find out? Are you about to be exposed? Is this damage control? The question was fair, and I understood why she would assume the worst. No one found out. No one was going to expose it. I'm telling you now because I can't carry the guilt anymore, because I've been learning about confession and honesty as I've grown in my faith, and because I realize that our marriage can never be healthy as long as this secret stands between us. She laughed again, that same bitter sound. Your faith? You're telling me that your newfound Christianity is what prompted this confession? Where was your faith when you were betraying your marriage vows? I wasn't a believer then, I said quietly. I had no spiritual life, no moral compass beyond my own rationalization. That's not an excuse. Plenty of non-religious people maintain integrity in their marriages. I failed, and I can't blame it on anything except my own selfishness and weakness. She was pacing now, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold herself together. I knew something was wrong, she said, speaking more to herself than to me. 3 years ago, you became more distant, more closed off. I thought it was just the stress of the presidency, the pressure you were under. I tried to be understanding, tried to give you space, and all that time, you were with her. I'm sorry, I said, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. Stop saying you're sorry, she shouted, whirling to face me. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't give me back 3 years of living a lie. Sorry doesn't undo the betrayal. You're right. I'm not saying sorry to fix it or to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it's true. Because I genuinely regret what I did and the pain I've caused you. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her struggling to hold back tears. Then the tears came anyway, streaming down her face as she stood there, looking at me with a mixture of anger and devastation. I trusted you, she said through her tears. Through everything, through the dangers of the revolution, through the threats from foreign powers, through all the chaos of your presidency, I trusted you. I thought at least our marriage was solid. At least you were faithful to me, even if everything else in our lives was uncertain. And now you're telling me that trust was misplaced, that you betrayed me and then lied about it for 3 years. I felt tears forming in my own eyes. I know. I broke your trust, and I understand if you can never trust me again. But I'm hoping that by finally telling the truth, by confessing completely, we might have a chance to rebuild. I know it will take time. I know you have every right to leave me. But I'm hoping... Don't, she interrupted. Don't tell me what you're hoping for. You don't get to manage my response or guide my feelings right now. You did this. You betrayed me and lied to me. Now you have to live with whatever I decide to do about it. You're absolutely right, I said. I'm sorry for even trying to suggest what should happen next. This is your decision. She walked to the window, looking out over the grounds of the presidential residence. We stood in silence for several minutes, and I didn't try to fill it. This was her time to process, to feel, to begin grappling with the truth I had just forced upon her. Finally, she spoke without turning around. I need you to leave. I need to be alone. I need time to think, to feel, to figure out what this means and what I'm going to do. Of course, I said, standing up. I'll stay in the guest quarters. Take all the time you need. As I walked toward the door, she spoke again. Ibrahim. I turned back. Did you love her? The question hit me like a physical blow. No. I said honestly, it wasn't about love. It was about ego, about feeling appreciated and admired, about escaping from the pressure and difficulty of our marriage. But I didn't love her. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was betraying you. Get out, she said, her voice breaking. Just get out. I left, closing the door behind me, and made my way to the guest quarters. Once alone, I collapsed onto the bed and wept not gentle tears but gut-wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. The relief of finally confessing was real, but so was the devastation of facing what I had done, of seeing the pain I had caused the woman I loved. I called Samuel and told him what had happened. "She's devastated," I said. "She's furious. She told me to leave and said she needs time to think." "That's understandable," Samuel said gently. "Ibrahim, you did the right thing by confessing, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that your wife may decide she can't continue the marriage. Confession doesn't guarantee restoration, it just makes restoration possible by removing the barrier of deception." "I know," I said, "and if she decides to leave, I'll accept it. I'll deserve it." "Don't think in terms of what you deserve," Samuel counseled. "Think in terms of what is true, what is right, and what God is doing. You confessed because it was right to confess, not because you were guaranteed a particular outcome. Now you wait, you pray, and you trust God with the results." Over the next several days, my wife and I barely spoke. She stayed in our private quarters. I remained in the guest wing. We communicated only about necessary logistics. I could see that she had been crying, that she was struggling terribly, but she wouldn't talk to me about it. She had asked for time, and I was determined to give it to her. But something surprising was happening inside me, despite the pain and uncertainty. I felt lighter than I had in 3 years. The crushing weight of the secret I had been carrying was gone. Yes, I was facing the consequences of my sin. My marriage might end. My wife was in terrible pain because of me. My integrity was publicly questionable if this ever became known. But I was no longer living a lie. I was no longer hiding. The burden of deception had been lifted. My prayer life transformed. Whereas before, my prayers had felt blocked and distant, now I could pray with freedom. I spent hours each day in prayer, not asking God to fix my marriage or control the outcomes, but simply confessing my sin more fully, expressing gratitude for the grace that had given me courage to confess, asking for God's healing for my wife regardless of what she decided about our marriage. I also found myself able to focus on my work as president in ways I hadn't been able to for weeks. The mental and emotional energy I had been expending to maintain my secret was no longer needed. I could think clearly, make decisions confidently, lead effectively. It was as if confession had unlocked something in me that had been bound. 5 days after my confession, my wife asked to meet with me. We sat in the same office where I had confessed, and I waited for her to speak first. "I've been thinking constantly about what you told me," she began. Her voice was calmer than it had been during our first conversation, but I could see the pain still etched on her face. "I've been angry, hurt, confused. I've thought about leaving you, about exposing you publicly, about making you pay for what you did. And I've also thought about our history together, about whether there's anything worth saving in our marriage." I remained silent, letting her continue at her own pace. "I talked to my sister," she said. "I needed someone to confide in, someone who could help me process this. She was furious on my behalf, told me I should leave you immediately. But she also asked me a question that I've been wrestling with. Do I want to save this marriage, or do I just want to punish you?" "What did you decide?" I asked quietly. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Part of me absolutely wants to punish you, wants you to hurt the way you've hurt me, but another part of me remembers the man I married, remembers the partnership we had before the stress and distance of your presidency drove us apart. And I'm trying to figure out if that man still exists, if our marriage still exists, or if it's been dead for years and I was just too blind to see it." "I think it's been dying," I said honestly. "I think we've both been letting it die slowly through neglect and distance. And my affair was both a symptom of that death and a cause of further death. But I don't think it's completely dead. I think if we both want to, if we're both willing to do the hard work, we might be able to resurrect it." She looked at me intently. "Why did you finally confess? Tell me the truth." I took a deep breath. "Because I couldn't carry the guilt anymore. Because I've been learning about confession and integrity through my faith. Because I realized that our marriage could never be healthy as long as I was hiding this secret. And because even though confessing might mean losing you, living with the lie was definitely losing both of us, losing you to deception and losing myself to hypocrisy." She nodded slowly. "At least you're being honest about your motivations. You're not pretending this was purely about my well-being or our marriage. You confessed because you needed to, because the guilt was destroying you." "Yes," I confirmed. "That doesn't make it less right to confess, but you're correct that my primary motivation was my own need to be free from the burden I was carrying." "I appreciate the honesty," she said. Then, after a long pause, "I'm not ready to say I forgive you. I'm not ready to say I want to work on our marriage, but I'm also not ready to say it's over. I need more time. I need space. I need to figure out who I am apart from you, apart from being the wife of the president. I understand, I said. Take whatever time and space you need. I'm not going to pressure you or try to influence your decision. Good, she said. Then, unexpectedly, but I do want to say one thing. As much as I hate what you did, as much as I'm hurt and angry, there's a part of me that's almost grateful that you finally told me the truth. I've felt the distance between us for 3 years, and I've blamed it on your work, on stress, on all the external pressures you face. But now I know the real reason. And even though the truth is devastating, at least it's truth. At least I'm not living in ignorance anymore. Her words gave me hope, not that our marriage would necessarily survive, but that I had made the right choice in confessing that truth was better than comfortable deception, that honesty opened possibilities that secrecy could never provide. Over the following weeks, my wife and I began what could only be described as a painful process of renegotiating our relationship. We started meeting with a Christian marriage counselor that Samuel recommended, a wise older couple who had been married for 40 years and had helped numerous couples navigate infidelity and betrayal. The counseling sessions were brutally difficult. The counselors didn't let me minimize my sin or rush my wife toward forgiveness. They held me accountable for the full weight of what I had done, not just the affair itself, but the 3 years of deception that followed, the way I had prioritized my own comfort and political position over honesty and integrity. Ibrahim, the husband counselor, said during one session, "You talk about the affair as if it was a discrete mistake that happened 3 years ago and ended. But you were actively sinning every day for 3 years by continuing to hide the truth. You were making a choice daily to prioritize self-protection over honesty." His words cut deep because they were absolutely true. I had been thinking of my confession as admitting to a sin I had committed 3 years ago. But he was right. I had been sinning continuously through my deception, making the choice every single day to keep my wife in the dark. The counselors also helped my wife process her pain without suppressing it or trying to move too quickly toward reconciliation. "You don't have to forgive yet," the wife counselor told her. "Forgiveness is a process, not a single moment. And even when you do forgive, that doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the betrayal didn't happen. It means releasing your husband from the debt he owes you, choosing not to hold the sin against him anymore. But that's a journey, and you're allowed to take as long as you need." Watching my wife work through her pain was agonizing. Sometimes she would be calm and rational, able to discuss our situation analytically. Other times her anger would erupt, and she would rage at me for what I had done. Sometimes she would weep, not out of anger but out of grief, for the marriage and trust that had been broken. I learned to simply be present with her emotions, to not try to manage them or make them go away, to let her feel what she needed to feel. About 6 weeks after my confession, something significant happened. My wife and I were in a counseling session, and she was expressing her anger about the affair and the deception. The male counselor asked her a question. "Have you considered how confession, even though it caused you pain, was actually an act of love?" My wife looked at him incredulously. "How is causing me this pain an act of love?" "Because," he explained, "your husband could have continued hiding his sin indefinitely. He could have taken his secret to the grave, and you never would have known. From a purely selfish standpoint, that would have been easier for him. No painful confession, no consequences, no risk to his marriage or presidency. But he chose to confess even though he knew it would devastate you, even though he knew it might end your marriage. Why? Because he valued truth and integrity more than his own comfort. Because he gave you the information you needed to make informed decisions about your own life. Because he stopped treating you like a child who needed to be protected from difficult truths and started treating you like an adult who deserved honesty." I saw my wife's expression shift as she considered this perspective. "I hadn't thought about it that way," she admitted quietly. "Don't misunderstand me," the counselor continued. "Confession doesn't erase the sin. Ibrahim is still fully responsible for the affair and the years of deception. But the decision to finally confess, even though it was partly motivated by his own need to relieve guilt, was also a decision to prioritize truth over convenience, to give you agency rather than keeping you in the dark. That doesn't fix what was broken, but it does create the possibility of genuine healing." That conversation marked a turning point. My wife didn't suddenly forgive me or announce she wanted to save our marriage, but I saw her begin to distinguish between the sin I had committed and the confession I had made, to recognize that while the former was pure betrayal, the latter, however imperfect in its timing and motivation, was a step toward integrity. Around this same time, I had an important conversation with Samuel about the concept of confession more broadly. Ibrahim, he said, you've experienced what happens when you confess sin that you've been hiding. You've felt the burden lift. You've experienced freedom. You've seen how truth, even painful truth, is better than comfortable deception. But I want you to understand that confession isn't just something you do once when you have a major hidden sin. Confession should become a regular practice. What do you mean? I asked. I mean that all of us sin regularly, maybe not in the dramatic ways like adultery, but in smaller ways that still separate us from God and from others. We're impatient with people, we're proud, we're selfish, we're dishonest in small ways. And if we don't regularly confess these sins, bringing them into the light before they grow, they accumulate and start to weigh us down. The reason your sin became so crushing is that you let it sit in darkness for 3 years. But what if you had confessed it immediately? It still would have been painful, still would have had consequences, but it wouldn't have become this massive burden that nearly destroyed you. His words resonated deeply. So you're saying I should confess regularly, not wait until I have major sins to admit? Exactly, he confirmed. James 5:16 says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. Regular confession to God and to trusted Christian brothers and sisters keeps us humble, keeps us honest, keeps us from letting sins accumulate in darkness where they grow and fester. I thought about this for a long time. My tendency had always been to hide weakness, to project strength, to appear invulnerable. As a military leader and president, I had cultivated an image of someone who was always in control, always confident, never struggling. But that image had required me to hide my sins, to pretend I was better than I was, to carry burdens alone rather than bringing them into the light. I began practicing regular confession, not just the major sins, but the smaller ones, impatience with staff, pride in my accomplishments, moments of dishonesty or manipulation. I would confess to Samuel, to my accountability group of Christian men that I had joined, sometimes to my wife when the sin involved her. And I discovered something remarkable. Regular confession made it much harder for sins to take root and grow. When I brought things into the light quickly, they lost their power over me. When I admitted struggles and weaknesses honestly, I found support and prayer rather than judgment. About 3 months after my initial confession to my wife, she asked to meet with me privately without the counselors. My heart was racing as we sat down together. I had no idea what she was going to say, whether she had decided to leave me or to try to rebuild our marriage. I've made a decision, she said. Her voice was calm, but I could see emotion in her eyes. I'm choosing to forgive you. I felt tears spring to my eyes immediately. Thank you, I whispered. Let me finish, she said. I'm choosing to forgive you, which means I'm releasing you from the debt you owe me. I'm choosing not to hold your sin against you anymore, not to punish you for it, not to bring it up as a weapon every time we have a disagreement. But I want you to understand, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness doesn't mean trust is automatically restored. Forgiveness is me deciding to let go of my right to vengeance, my desire to make you pay. But trust has to be rebuilt slowly, through your consistent behavior over time. I understand, I said. I'm so grateful for your forgiveness, and I'm committed to earning back your trust.